She never expected a single phone notification to hurt this much.
It was a quiet afternoon. The house was still. She had just finished her chores and sat down with a cup of tea, scrolling through her phone without much thought. Weddings were common on social media. Smiling faces. Fancy clothes. Nothing unusual. Then she saw their post. She paused. The photo loaded slowly, but she already knew who it was before it fully appeared. The groom stood tall in a dark suit. The bride glowed in white, smiling proudly. Flowers surrounded them. Everyone looked happy, perfect, her lips curved into a small smile at first. Then she read the caption. Family only. She blinked once, then twice, thinking she had misunderstood. She read it again. The same words stared back at her. Family only. Her smile faded. She zoomed in on the picture. Not because she wanted to admire it, but because she was searching for something or someone. She scanned every face carefully. She recognized nearly everyone, sisters, uncles, cousins, even relatives, who barely visited once a year. But she was not there. Her heart dropped slowly. Like something heavy sinking in water. She scrolled. Another photo. Same wedding. Different angle. Same caption. Family only. Her fingers tightened around the phone. For a moment she felt foolish. Maybe she was overreacting? Maybe it meant something else? Maybe they had a small ceremony. Maybe, but deep down she knew the truth. She had not been invited, not to the wedding, not to the celebration, not even to watch from a distance. She wasn't just an acquaintance. She wasn't someone from the past who no longer mattered. She had been there during hard times. She had stepped in when others stepped away. She had helped quietly, without asking for credit or praise. She remembered late nights when the groom needed advice. She remembered birthdays she helped organize, meals she paid for, problems she helped solve. And now, according to that caption, she wasn't family. She placed the phone face down on the table and stared at the wall. The room suddenly felt colder. The ticking of the clock sounded louder than usual. She told herself to stay calm. People are allowed to choose, she thought. It's their wedding, their rules. But the pain didn't listen to logic. It wasn't just about missing a wedding. It was about being erased. About realizing that the place she believed she held in their life was never as strong as she thought. That evening, she didn't comment on the post. She didn't send a message asking why. She didn't call. She stayed silent. When someone asked her later if she had seen the wedding photos, she nodded and said, "Yes, they look nice." Her voice didn't shake. Her face didn't reveal anything, but inside something cracked. That night, sleep didn't come easily. Her mind replayed memories like old scenes from a movie. Holidays spent together. Promises said casually. Words like, "You're always family to us." She wondered when those words lost their meaning. The next morning, she woke up early, just like always. She made breakfast. She cleaned. She went on with her routine. To anyone watching, she looked fine. But the silence from them was louder than any argument. Days turned into weeks. No message arrived. No explanation. No apology. The wedding photos stayed online, gathering likes and comments. People praised how beautiful and perfect everything looked. No one asked where she was. Slowly, she stopped expecting anything. She told herself to let it go. She reminded herself that respect cannot be forced. And love should not come with conditions. She thought the story ended there. She believed the wedding was the final chapter. She didn't know that 6 months later, the same phone that showed her those words, "family only," would ring again, and when it did, the voice on the other end would be crying. The wedding came and went. But the silence that followed stayed. Days passed after she saw the photos. Then weeks. The excitement around the wedding slowly faded online, but for her the feeling did not fade at all. It settled quietly, like a weight she carried everywhere. No one reached out. No message arrived saying, "We should have told you." No call came asking, "Are you okay?" No explanation was offered. She checked her phone less and less. Each time it buzzed, a small part of her hoped it might be them. And each time it wasn't. She felt a strange mix of relief and disappointment. She told herself she was done expecting anything. She focused on her daily life. She went to work. She ran errands. She spoke to friends. From the outside, nothing seemed different. But inside, her trust had shifted. She noticed how easily people rewrite history. She remembered the years when they needed her, the times they leaned on her without hesitation. Back then, no one questioned whether she was family. No one drew lines or used labels. Now the lines were clear. One afternoon, she attended a small family gathering. It wasn't related to the wedding, but some of the same faces were there. People smiled when they saw her. Some hugged her warmly. Others avoided eye contact. No one mentioned the wedding, not directly. Someone casually said, "It was a beautiful ceremony." Another added, "Everything looked perfect." She nodded and smiled politely. Inside, she felt invisible. Later that evening, she overheard a quiet conversation in another room. Someone mentioned that the guest list had been complicated. Another person said it was better not to create drama. She didn't interrupt. She didn't ask questions, but those words stayed with her. Create drama. That's what her presence had been reduced to. That night, she sat alone and thought deeply about what family really meant. Was it blood? Was it titles? Or was it showing up when it mattered most? She realized that for a long time she had given more than she should have. She had stayed quiet to keep peace. She had accepted less than she deserved just to feel included. And now, even that wasn't enough. So she made a quiet decision. She stopped checking their social media. She stopped bringing them up in conversations. She stopped waiting. She didn't do this out of anger. She did it to protect herself. Months passed, life continued, but something shifted during that time. She became more careful with her energy. She learned to say no without explaining herself. She learned that being kind doesn't mean being available to everyone. She noticed how peace slowly returned when expectations disappeared. Then, one evening, almost 6 months after the wedding, something unexpected happened. Her phone rang. The number was familiar. She stared at the screen for a long moment. Her heart began to beat faster. Not because she missed them, but because she sensed something was wrong. They had been silent for half a year. People don't usually call after that long unless they need something. She let it ring once, twice. Then she answered. She didn't even have time to say hello before she heard it. Crying. Not the kind that is quiet or controlled. It was heavy, shaky, full of emotion. The voice on the other end struggled to speak. Words came out broken. Apologies mixed with fear. Sentences didn't make sense at first. She stayed quiet. She listened. As the crying continued, one thing became clear. The happiness from the wedding photos was gone. Something had fallen apart. And suddenly, the woman who wasn't family enough to attend the wedding was the one they had turned to in their darkest moment. She closed her eyes, took a slow breath, and prepared herself because whatever came next would change everything. She stayed silent as the crying continued on the other end of the phone. At first, the words came out tangled and unclear. Apologies mixed with fear. Long pauses filled with sobs. She could hear breathing break and return again. She didn't interrupt. She had learned that when people are truly overwhelmed, they don't need advice right away. They need someone to listen. After a while, the voice steadied just enough to speak clearly. Things were not okay. The life that looked so perfect in the wedding photos had begun to fall apart almost immediately. Money problems had appeared sooner than expected. Plans that were made with confidence had failed. Support they thought would always be there slowly disappeared. People who smiled proudly at the wedding had become distant. Calls were ignored. Messages went unanswered. Promises vanished. As she listened, she felt a strange mix of emotions. There was concern, yes. She wasn't heartless. She never had been. But there was also a quiet sadness, not for what had happened to them, but for how predictable it all felt. She had seen this pattern before. People push others away when life is good. They assume success means independence. Then, when life becomes heavy, they remember who used to help carry the weight. The voice on the phone finally said the words that had been building underneath all the tears. We didn't know who else to call. She closed her eyes. That sentence said everything. Not we missed you. Not we were wrong. But we had no one else. She asked gently what had happened. The story came out slowly. One issue led to another. Stress caused arguments. Arguments created distance. Distance turned into isolation. The support they expected from others never arrived. And somewhere in the middle of all that chaos, guilt finally surfaced. They mentioned the wedding. At first, carefully. Like stepping around broken glass. They admitted that the decision to label it family only was influenced by opinions they shouldn't have listened to. Someone had said inviting her would make things uncomfortable. Someone else had questioned her role. No. One had spoken up for her, and they went along with it. She felt a quiet ache in her chest, but she kept her voice calm. She didn't argue. She didn't remind them of all she had done. She didn't list her sacrifices. She simply said, I saw the photos. There was a long pause, then more tears. They apologized. Not perfectly. Not with the right words. But it was clear the regret was real. Pain has a way of stripping pride away. They asked if she could meet. She hesitated. 6 months ago, she would have said yes without thinking. She would have rushed to help, to fix, to comfort. But she wasn't the same person anymore. She had spent months rebuilding her sense of worth in silence. She had learned how easily people forget your value when they believe they no longer need you. She told them she needed time to think. After the call ended, she sat alone for a long while, staring at the dark screen of her phone. The same phone that once showed her the words family only. She thought about how quickly roles can change. How the person excluded from a celebration can become the person needed in a crisis. She wasn't angry. She was tired of being remembered only when something went wrong. That night, she barely slept. Not because she didn't care, but because she cared too much. And she didn't want to make the wrong decision. Helping them would be easy, but protecting herself was harder. By morning, she knew one thing for sure. If she chose to be there again, it would not be the same way as before, because love without respect slowly turns into pain, and this time, she refused to disappear quietly. She agreed to meet them a few days later, not because she felt obligated, but because she needed clarity for herself. They chose a quiet place, away from crowds and familiar faces. When she arrived, she immediately noticed how different they looked. The confidence they once carried so easily was gone. Their shoulders were heavy. Their eyes tired. They stood when they saw her, unsure of what to say. She greeted them politely and sat down. For a moment, no one spoke. Then the truth began to surface, not all at once, but in pieces. They explained how the wedding planning had been filled with outside voices. Too many opinions. Too much pressure to please certain people. Somewhere in that noise, decisions were made without thinking about long-term consequences. Someone had questioned her place. Someone else said inviting her would upset others. Someone insisted it was simpler to keep the guest list small, and instead of defending her, they stayed quiet. They admitted it now, with their heads lowered. At the time, everything felt rushed. They told themselves it was only one day. They believed she would understand, but they never asked. They talked about the months that followed the wedding. How support from others slowly disappeared. How friends who promised help became distant. How financial stress turned into emotional strain. They said they realized too late who had always been steady. She listened carefully. What hurt most wasn't the wedding itself anymore. It was knowing that her value had been discussed like a problem to manage. Rather than a person to respect, she finally spoke. Her voice was calm, but firm. She told them she didn't need to be invited to feel important. What hurt was being erased without honesty. Being labeled as someone who didn't belong. She explained how seeing the words, family only, had felt like a door closing quietly in her face. They listened without interrupting. There were tears again. Not loud this time, just silent. They admitted that shame had kept them from reaching out sooner. They didn't know how to face her. They were afraid she wouldn't answer. She nodded. Fear makes people avoid responsibility. She told them something they didn't expect. She said she had forgiven them long before the phone call, not because they Deserved it, but because carrying resentment was too heavy. But forgiveness, she explained, did not mean returning to the old dynamic. She had changed. She was no longer willing to give endlessly without being seen. They asked her what that meant. She took a deep breath. It meant honesty. It meant boundaries. It meant respect. She said she was willing to help, but only in ways that didn't erase her dignity. No guilt. No pressure. No emotional control. If she felt dismissed again, she would walk away. They agreed quickly, almost desperately. But she knew that words spoken in crisis are easy. Real change takes time. As the meeting ended, she felt lighter than she had expected. Not because everything was fixed, but because the truth was finally out in the open. She didn't leave feeling powerful. She left feeling clear. Clear about who she was. Clear about what she deserved. Clear about what family should mean. That evening, as she drove home, she realized something important. The wedding had shown her where she stood in their world back then. This moment was showing her where she stood in her own, and that difference mattered more than anything else. After that meeting, she didn't rush into anything. In the past, she would have acted immediately. She would have stepped in, solved problems, offered support without limits. That version of her believed that love meant giving more, even when it hurt. But she was different now. She took time to think. Not hours, days. About every moment she had stayed silent to keep peace. Every time she had ignored her own discomfort to protect someone else's feelings. And she thought about the wedding photos again, not with anger, but with clarity. Those photos didn't just show a celebration. They showed a decision. When she finally reached out, she was calm and direct. She asked what kind of help they actually needed. Not what they hoped for, not what they wished she would fix. The answer surprised her. They didn't need money. They didn't need rescue. They needed emotional support, guidance, someone stable to remind them how to slow down and face things honestly. She agreed to help in small, clear ways. She set boundaries from the start. She wouldn't be available at all hours. She wouldn't take sides in arguments. She wouldn't carry responsibility that wasn't hers. At first, they seemed unsure how to respond. They were used to her saying yes to everything. But slowly, something shifted. They began to listen more, to pause before reacting, to take responsibility instead of looking for someone else to blame. Not every conversation was easy. There were moments when old habits tried to return, moments when guilt appeared quietly, wrapped in polite words. Each time she addressed it gently but firmly. She refused to disappear again. As weeks passed, the tension began to ease. Communication became more honest. Apologies turned into actions, not just words. She noticed something important. Helping with boundaries felt different. It didn't drain her. It didn't leave her feeling invisible. For the first time, she felt respected, not because she was needed, but because she was valued. One evening, they brought up the wedding again. They admitted that if they could go back, they would do things differently. Not just with the guest list, but with how they treated people who stood by them quietly. She listened, but she didn't dwell on it. She knew something now that she hadn't known before. Closure doesn't always come from fixing the past. Sometimes it comes from refusing to repeat it. She didn't need a public apology. She didn't need a post explaining anything. What she needed was consistency, and she was finally seeing it. Still, she remained careful. Trust, once cracked, takes time to rebuild. She allowed space for growth, but not at the cost of herself. Late one night, as she sat alone reflecting, she realized something that made her smile slightly. The person who felt excluded months ago no longer felt small. She had learned to stand in her worth quietly, without anger, without revenge. Whatever happened next, she knew she would be okay. Because this time, she was choosing herself too. Time has a quiet way of revealing truth. Months passed after everything settled. The chaos that once filled their lives slowly faded. Problems didn't disappear completely, but they learned how to face them without running or pointing fingers, and she remained present. But differently. She no longer rushed to fix everything. She listened. She offered guidance when asked. She stepped back when something wasn't hers to carry. Surprisingly, This made the relationship healthier. There was less tension, more honesty, fewer expectations. For the first time, she felt like an equal, not a backup plan. One day, while scrolling through her phone, she came across the wedding photos again. The same ones that once caused so much pain. This time, her chest didn't tighten. She looked at the smiling faces, the carefully chosen words, the polished image of happiness. And she realized something important. That photo captured a moment, but not the whole story. Life had tested everyone since then. Some people had shown up. Others had disappeared. Titles, labels, and captions had proven meaningless when things became difficult. Family, she understood now, isn't proven on the happiest day of your life. It's proven on the hardest ones. Later that week, she received a message, not a call filled with tears, but a simple note. It thanked her, not for fixing anything, not for rescuing them, but for staying honest. She smiled softly when she read it. She didn't feel proud. She felt peaceful. The distance that once existed had turned into something balanced. Not the same as before, but stronger in a different way. And if it hadn't worked out, she knew she would still have been okay. Because the most important change hadn't happened in them. It had happened in her. She had learned that love without respect slowly breaks you. That silence can teach more than arguments. And that choosing yourself doesn't mean abandoning others. It means showing up whole. The wedding that once made her feel excluded had given her something unexpected. Clarity. She no longer needed to prove she belonged. She knew where she stood, and when the phone rang now, she didn't answer out of obligation. She answered out of choice. That was the difference.